Welcome to PolyCast, a Civilization podcast focused on game strategy.
Dan Q.
Makalua.
The Me and Team.
Mad Jin. With guest co-host,
The Observer.
Robert.
Yes.
Can I get you to say your username for the purposes of the show?
Sure. Like any countdown?
Your username is sure. Well, I didn't know that.
Sure. You can.
Surely you must be joking.
Hi, Internet. Welcome to episode 167. Of course, Dan is always here.
Your stick-to-itiveness is only surpassed by my own.
Imagine.
Not quite awake enough to still Mackey's coffee.
You get away from my coffee, you. The Me and Team.
Greetings with beatings.
Okay, then. And our guest, The Observer. He's observing you.
Yeah.
Do you even lift?
Do you even lift? You can detect invisible units, can't you? Such a hacker.
So, we've had some feedback on our previous episode. And by feedback, it's more like, you were mean! There was a few comments. Blue Goop says, just to clarify about John Schaefer, I read from his blog that he's the only one working full-time on At the Gates, and the other two have other full-time jobs. Actually, this is somewhat what we expected, given that it is only at the beginning of the project. They're all living in the same house. Well, that's a little weirder. And the programmer, Jonathan, has extensive programming experience in the business field, and this is offering him a more creative outlet. And actually, I do know that I did reference that. He's likely got experience elsewhere, which is better, actually. Not having game experience with programming probably makes him a better programmer for the gaming industry, that is. They are friends and have been for a while, whatever. Conifer is John's company. Perhaps this helps. The whole 40K seems a bit low. No, actually it doesn't. Conifer is John's company, but the only one who works there is John. The 40K is still pretty low, even though that they're all working and everything else. Yes, the shoestring budget can sometimes work, but even 40K is pretty low in this day and age because even just getting it onto Steam or other such things starts costing money, etc., etc. With what we were thinking he was going to do with the game, or at least what he had suggested he was doing with the game, I can calculate out that 40K is going to be a little low. Now, we did caveat that, of course, with the fact that he may have other funding sources. He might have other, like, personal loans and or could have a publisher or somebody, since he does know some people, feeding money into his company, and then the Kickstarter is just for show. Doing the proverbial two guys in a garage start your own company doesn't work so much anymore, with minor exceptions, like when you're gonna make Minecraft. Otherwise, that was the nicer comment on our commentary. Vale says, wasn't the biggest fan of Civ 5, but it sounds like you guys would actually be happy if Schaefer and At the Gates failed. Maybe it's time to move on. I don't think any of us said that we'd be happy if John failed. Most of our commentary was about him putting his name on At the Gates, like Sid Meier's Civ 5, Sid John Schaefer's At the Gates.
We don't want to see anybody fail with gaming. We want gaming to keep growing.
And even if we have issues, or we take issue with things he's designing or stuff he's done in the past to put his name on it, but potentially failing is still there, I think we're all very happy if he succeeds. We'd be pleasantly surprised in some cases, but none of us are hoping he's going to fail.
Yeah, I had said in response that, speaking for myself, I had and have some concerns as noted, and that's the extent of it. Val had said that I was pretty measured in my criticism, but based on many of the concerns voiced, it was clear that some of your panel hadn't even read anything about the game, and the show had an uncomfortable, we don't like this guy vibe. You're all smart people, and I enjoy hearing your opinions, but some of the comments just felt a little petty to me, and anyways, that was my 2 cents, and it was at that point that I had said that I would raise this for a discussion on the next episode, and I think that's been addressed already in what has been said by Imagine. Blue Goop, he says he's been looking forward to not the next Saturday, but the following for a while now, Dan. And I think he's looking forward to the post-produced version of the show as opposed to the live version. I'm assuming that's because the timing is inconvenient Not because it only sounds good after it's been post-produced, but hey, what the heck do I know?
I think he's referring to, like, waiting for the next PolyCast. Like, not the next Saturday, but the following one. But he should be always looking forward to the next Saturday, because Beyond the Monument is on every other Saturday.
Shameless self-promoting. What a surprise.
Beep. Hey, I've got about 100 Beyond the Monument references to go to catch up to Dan.
Dan, yeah, we know.
Okay, fine. You can find over at blog.magin.ca.
Dan, would you like to tell people where they can find the PolyCast?
Right here.
On the podcast.
Ta-da! Here's the link.
I can't believe Mackie encouraged that.
Yep, she did. She did.
I like it.
But we are on PolyCast, so it's kind of a requirement.
Now, I guess finally from this thread on CFC, Kamikaze, who was a past guest on the show, says, so, are we going to hear from John on the show anytime in the near future? And I just likely, ...
That about sums it up.
Yeah.
It's like,
Not that I have anything against John Schaefer. I just don't think he would agree to be on the show.
Not anymore.
whoops.
Not at this point. This actually came through our YouTube channel, which is the PolyCast. Check it out. Anyway, comment by Ninya Nunya. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. We have an avatar of an anime character, which is great for Civ, absolutely. And this is more of a gameplay specific question. Basically, Ninya here is playing like vanilla Civ 5 and says the main problem seems to come with sudden starvation, then at random points complete loss of gold production. Tends to play with China. Not as aggressive in the early game and try to settle a bunch of cities by Renaissance. And then I don't understand the source of going into starvation here. But basically, we're looking for general gameplay tips on this. I'm not sure where to start because there's so much information left out of questions along these lines. That's the reason that these are typically handled through the strategy and tips subforums or whatever. It is because without actually seeing what's being done, it's very difficult to really analyze gameplay, I guess.
Well, I think part of the reason this person is asking is in the last sentence of their third post, which is sadly I don't have any of my saves anymore because of an accidental purge. So there's no saves that they can attach. There's no images that they can attach. So I guess they're just looking from us just some general pointers of where to look at, what to look for, what to do.
Oh my gosh, we could spend like an entire show on just that, though. I don't know where to start.
Well, let's stick to the basics. I mean, when this person says that their copy of Civ is severely outdated and I do not possess Gods and Kings, suggests to me that we're maybe missing one or more pieces of downloadable content that came before. I'm guessing what that means. Not that makes that significant of a difference.
Well, no, but we're looking for general gameplay advice here. But, I mean, you want to get a decent amount of luxury so that you can grow your cities. You probably don't want to overexpand into unhappiness, which might be happening here. If it's instead of starvation, the cities just aren't growing because they're unhappy. I could see that being the case. There's really no reason you should be starving your cities as long as you're working a positive amount of food yield. And then other than that, you sell luxuries for gold and take social policies based on what you're trying to do.
Well, yeah, it's not just about stagnation. It's the fact that they're actually starving. So I'm thinking,
yeah,
okay, did you ally yourself with one or more maritime city-states and now you're not getting that? For example, have you just found yourself in a nuclear war and have now had your tiles decimated?
I don't think in the Renaissance there's nuclear war, but maybe.
Well, damn mod.
Well, they've hit Renaissance.
That's true. The
Yeah.
AIs are nuking, and Ninya is just not aware of that. Somehow I don't think that's in particular what's going on here.
An area with too much plains, which doesn't have enough food.
Yeah, the industrial era causing starvation. I can't think of offhand why that you should suddenly start starving in the industrial era.
Is it maybe they switched focus in their cities and the governor is just, oh, okay, you want us to focus on production? Okay, we'll just sacrifice some population to do that, or known to do that.
I guess that could happen. I was kind of hoping that would be patched out of even vanilla, because that's really bad, but, and it did happen.
Could be a lot of barbarians, too.
In industrial? I guess. Just like in this kind of thing, you just want to rearrange your tiles so you're not starving.
Yeah.
And actually, this person specifically mentions their capital going into starvation. As I was thinking, if it was kind of more like the fringe cities, for example, then maybe you might, even in that later era, if there hadn't been a lot of exploration or a lot of settling of that land, then maybe there would be barbarians. But your capital? It's like,
And he's saying that there's a surplus of 5 food.
Well, trying to have at least, yeah, which...
Yeah, but even if you have a surplus of 0 food, you shouldn't starve. So I'm thinking this is actually just an unhappiness issue of some kind. And then maybe overbuilding units without being able to support them, not really working enough trading posts or getting gold from other means, something along that lines. I don't think it's possible to starve with a food surplus under any circumstance.
Yeah, if you've got extra food in your city, you aren't starving. Unless, of course, you are taking all of your population and putting them as specialists.
But then you don't have a surplus of food.
Yeah, pretty much.
The only thing I could see is there was an issue in vanilla where the governor would rearrange the tiles it's working after you hit end turn and then starve you.
Oh, that part can happen. Like, if you're working a food tile, but you're set to production focus, and a barbarian or somebody else that you're at war with steps onto the food tile, it will select a production tile to make up for it. But that's because
I've seen it without anything in the city's workable hexes at all. Like, it used to just do that.
Oh, well, that was long ago vanilla issues, maybe.
Yeah, but like that's the only thing I could think of, and it was not this widespread.
That's why, kids, locking down all your tiles and micromanaging your city's workers is always the best thing to do. Never let the AI have a chance at screwing with you.
Yeah.
Well, this person does mention that they're constantly micromanaging their cities, so I'm hoping that that in and of itself is not an issue. But yeah, hopefully we've given enough general pointers here that, seeing as how they don't have the saves anymore, I guess it's not something that this person can revisit and try to improve, but in a new game to try to avoid this from happening in the first place.
Yeah, and please, I would really recommend, and we have a good relationship with the forums, so I would recommend checking out the forums, especially strategy and tips subsection of them, and really seeing how people play, comparing your saves to other people's saves, maybe even posting a save of your own that people can actually take a look at. Because that's how a lot of us got better in the various Civilization games. Better avenue for analyzing what specifically is going wrong for an individual player.
Alright, it sounds like you guys want to talk more about At the Gates.
Really? Well, go for it.
Alright, yeah, so John Schaefer, he did have all these updates that he puts on the Kickstarter, and one of them is building an empire builder, which I think is kind of neat. I like how he kind of picks apart all these different dimensions, maybe kind of in a simple way, and it doesn't go too in-depth, but he kind of breaks it into 3 different sections that he wants to describe. The first one is designing a 4X game, the second is architecting a 4X game, and the third is beautifying a 4X game. Beloved genre, sure, yeah. Obviously, anybody who's looking at the Kickstarter is interested in 4X games. He's trying to sell his product here. But designing a 4X game, unique gameplay is what sets empire builders apart from all other strategy tiles, and a handful of attributes are especially important in this recipe. The most crucial of these is that you shape the world, not the designer. Trying to make sure that the game doesn't play you, you play it.
Yeah, the game does have to play you a little bit. If your maps and your enemy civs or, other stuff are interacting with you, you're going to have to adjust. So you need to be able to interact with it. It's not a one-way flow.
Yeah. There's got to be some problem to solve.
Yeah.
The bad news for 4X gamers is that an incredibly freeform experience of this sort is fragile. Rather than laying out a clear, controlled path for players, you must instead trust completely in the web of mechanics you've woven. Is it too easy to build a massive empire? Too hard? A single flaw in pacing or balance can bring down the entire game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as he knows quite well. But I think for the designing side of it, he gets into the map. And we even have map modders for Civ 5 who write completely different style of scripts to find a random generated map. That's how important it tends to be, is even just to get a random map. It's not just any random map will do.
Yeah, Schaefer says that this is quote-unquote practically unique to our genre.
Well,
the random map. I don't know. I don't know about practically unique, but it's very substantial. Yes.
Well, let's see. We'll go through the various genres. Any action adventure or RPG style, the map's already built because they need the map so that you can have quest locations and stuff. So there's no randomness there. RTSs, generally no random map. Generally.
Minecraft.
Well, Minecraft's not a 4X game.
Branches out there.
Definitely not RTS either.
Yeah.
No, but Schaefer actually does mention Minecraft as the deceptively humble title that can become one of the business's greatest success stories, quote unquote.
Well, yeah, because it was simple, but you can do so much with it. And that's
the hack and slash, like Diablo, has random maps.
Yes, games that use dungeon crawlers and stuff like that, they do have that sort of randomness to their maps. Sometimes where they just slap random pieces of maps together.
You're right, though. Just most genres of games, it's not practical to use a random map. Why would you do it? Like on a shooter. Oh, I can't get to the other side because there's a wall here. Just a wall.
Somebody put a mountain in my map.
Yeah, Schaefer states that the random map and the need for players to adapt their strategies to the circumstances combined are the reason why 4X games are unmatched in terms of their replayability. And I would say for me, the replayability factor, which it's not just about the random map and the need to adapt strategies like some other things we get into in the second Schaefer article, like user interface, for example, keeps people coming back in terms of whether or not you can actually reasonably capture that replayability. It's like the game is replayable if you're willing to slog through this, that, and the other thing. But in terms of general statements, I'm with them so far.
Yeah. Yeah. Replayability does depend a lot on the map, and for 4X games anyways.
Yes.
I actually like this part in particular under his heading for design. A game doesn't need to be realistic, but it doesn't need to be at least believable and roughly match with players' expectations. Which, especially the latter part about matching with players' expectations.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, because there is no one player expectation, and even if you do meet a player's expectations, that can be in complete conflict, certainly in partial conflict, with another player's expectations. So I guess that's why he says roughly match.
Or game balance.
But still, it's like, wow. Sometimes, okay, my expectation is that this game of checkers is going to play like a game of chess. Am I going to be disappointed?
A little.
Probably.
Like all of a sudden, snipers are on the towers of castles. That's a little weird.
You know what, though? Like, one would hope that your expectations of going into checkers would be to play checkers. And it's the same thing with the 4X game, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have certain things that within the context of the game's rules and the context of the game's design make sense, and then some things don't. And it's those things that don't that are grating.
Yep.
He also talks about the value offered by overlapping systems. And he says, well, wait, isn't this an important feature in pretty much every game? That is indeed true, but the formula used in Empire Builders is unique. That addictive one more turn feeling comes from always having something just around the corner to look forward to. And that looking forward to kind of gets to, okay, I'm hitting end turn a lot, and not a lot is happening other than my hitting end turn. So What am I looking forward to? Hitting end turn again and again and again?
Yeah. If all you're doing is sitting there going, derp, enter, derp, enter. Not as interesting.
One of the reasons that culture victories can get dull.
No, really? Is it over yet? Is it over yet?
So he kind of moves on from there, architecting a game. What 4X games do typically have, though, are lots of small objects. And by lots, I mean lots between every building and every city, each individual character in the units, hundreds, maybe even thousands of trees. It adds up quickly, and if you're not careful, it can bring someone's computer to its knees. And is he kind of hinting at that this game is going to be very complicated and your computer's going to have issues?
No, actually, because his next line is the other way.
Yeah, he's hinting away from it. Essentially, I asked somebody who actually knows a little bit about programming, because I just didn't understand why, if you don't have animations on, that's so system demanding or whatever. And with 3D models, you have to render them constantly, regardless of animating them. Mm-hmm. So it barely even matters if you animate them, because you're still rendering them. And unless the animations themselves are flashy, it's not going to make much difference, which was insightful.
And besides the animations, like for Civ, the animations are more about like attacking and everything else, which is only a small part of what's going on at any one point in time.
Yeah.
But yeah, his point is making games are two-dimensional can be a huge help, because then you're only drawing one graphic per object.
So there's potential for all kinds of platforms, not just PC.
Yes, not only that, but it will run much, 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 much better than either Civ 4 or 5 just because of that decision.
Nah, not necessarily. It depends on what else he does with it. It just means that the graphic
true.
side won't be as intense.
I agree with you, but you would have to fail pretty hard to get the same sort of system requirements struggling that you get out of those games that do have the 3D rendering. That's really a huge difference. And if you go back to older Civ games where you just hit enter, the amount of time it takes between turns is incredible compared to like now. It's so much faster.
He also talks about the need to make systems modular and allow for rapid and extensive iteration. Although, more generally, there's no 3-step guide to designing a strategy game. That's right, John, it's 4 steps. No, I was kidding. And you're going to make a ton of mistakes along the way.
Oops.
Well, and no, he speaks from first-hand experience, like pretty well anyone in the genre, right? Many features will need to be completely retooled and possibly ripped out altogether. And then this is perhaps my favorite point, and I think modders everywhere will be like, no, really? If your code isn't written with this in mind, it can get messy quick.
Yeah. Oh, really? He's talking about architecture. If you're really bad, architecting something isn't going to make it any better. I mean, architecture tends to be a more specialized field when it comes to stuff anyways. Although, yeah, he's using architecture in more generic term rather than the actual architecture that people would actually build. But he is talking about more the design side, again, though again, he's using design as something different. Basically, if the code is not built so that you can change things easily, then you've got bad code. Plus, there's a lot of technical challenges with using random maps where you have random amounts of stuff going in, and you have to be able to keep it balanced and make sure that the two general limitations are processing, because you only have one CPU or a couple CPUs to run with, and only so much RAM, and of course storage space, but that's usually not an issue anymore.
Monther has said something in chat which allows me to do something that I would like to do. Bad code, bad code. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when QA comes for you?
And
Boo.
Thank you, Monther.
What's QA? Are those nice people that we pat on the head and tell them to get away? Because that's what the gaming industry does.
Poor quality assurance.
No.
Aww.
For studios who don't let the QA people do QA, or QA people who just like hire a bunch of monkeys off the street and let them run at it and call that QA.
So he closes up this article with talking about the art, beautifying a game. Big artistic challenge in every strategy game is balancing clarity with style. Interesting, difficult decisions are bread and butter of this genre, and for those who exist, your situation needs to be clear and options available to even clearer, which I like clarity when it comes to games. It doesn't have to be really complex, as long as it's consistent with his message in this game.
Yeah, I think what he's getting at is if there's...
It's tough.
If you're going to have choices there, don't hide them from the player. Don't force them to have to hunt for a lot of stuff. It's also about the art, too. You know, if you're going with beauty over style and, you know, your map looks awesome, but you can't see your units... because the map's taking over. Because you thought, hey, you know it'd be awesome? This is a forest, so you should have the units occluded in the forest so you can't see them too well. That would not be a good choice for a strategy game.
Instead, they will stand on the trees.
Exactly. It makes it less realistic, but actually being able to see stuff without, you know, having to zoom all the way in and search tree to tree looking for your unit. Yes, that would be bad.
Actually being able to play the game is always an important element of the game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember in Age of Empires 2, back in the day, what they did is when units got behind buildings or trees, it would have a color outline. A little easier to see your units as they stand out behind objects. But I can't imagine that working here. The topographical look.
Yeah, well, not with his current design style for how he's trying to make it look. Most 4X games don't do that anyways. If the artists are allowed to go to their extreme, most artists try to go to the extreme, then you're not going to be able to play a game because, well, it'll now be a piece of art.
The same lessons that apply when designing a 4X game also hold true for the art side. The strength of your game is determined by how well all of the small pieces come together to become one. There's truly no better example of how the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts! Exclamation point.
Sure, why not?
Maybe speaking of trying to be greater than the sum of its parts, specifically now, John Schaefer on revisiting the design of Civilization 5, he says, there's no guarantee that if you love Civ 5 that you'll also love At the Gates, nor that if you hated one that you'll also hate the other. Civ 5 was a great success both critically and financially, but there's no ignoring the fact that Civ 5's gameplay didn't live up to everyone's expectations.
Really?
Quote unquote. Further, I have no problem admitting that my design wasn't perfect. If my past work has given you reason to doubt my talents, I hope that this article might then help replace that with a new confidence. Quote unquote. Well, yeah. He talks about interface, diplomacy, AI, resources, economics, policies, and combat. And what he's doing is he's talking about Civ 5 and then talking about how it's similar or to be different in At the Gates and why he's making those decisions to make it the same, to modify it, keep it, remove it, or whatever. First thing he talks about specifically is an interface. And he says that he's particularly proud of what our team accomplished with the UI. He says a key factor in shaping a learning curve is how much help the interface provides or doesn't. We did a great job of focusing the player's attention on what really matters, but my one disappointment with the UI was the general lack of power features tailored for hardcore fans. Didn't end up with as many information overlays, screens, or modes as I would have liked, but user-created mods have addressed this in both Civilization 4 and 5, but integrating it into the full games is obviously preferable. And there is silence to that because people are trying to balance the visceral with the constructiveness of diplomacy. My original goal was for the AI leaders to act human. When you're simulating one with a computer, there's no way to make this fun. Quote-unquote important lesson you learned. Any attempt to do so just turns into random, unproductive noise. By no means, though, should AI leaders be completely predictable. However, they do need a clear rhyme and reason behind their actions. Mm-hmm. In Civ 5, they were, quote-unquote, completely enslaved to their gameplay situation, and as a result, they appeared random. He does say that he later modified their behavior to be more predictable, but it was too late to completely change course. The biggest takeaway from this is that the only thing which matters in a game is the experience inside the player's head. I don't know about the experience inside the player's head necessarily.
It's a scary place.
Absolute statements are absolutely problematic, but I get the part about making AI, you want them to...
more human, yeah.
I think part of the reason designers try to get to that is when you play multiplayer and you're playing against other humans, for the most part, unless you're playing against someone who's particularly new, particularly not with it, particularly distracted, doesn't seem to have an aptitude for that particular game, it's going to be a more challenging experience because the human is going to be able to think of things more quickly, more intuitively, think more steps ahead than an AI is going to be. So in that respect, the AI needs to be more human, but the problem is, when you try to make them act more human, it's not just make them act more human, but they need to have the process behind why is it that they're acting in this particularly human way? And I don't think our ability to code AI is quite there yet, at least not in games, at least not in the budgets that we see. And I think this comes back to our discussion about, smart AI versus ridiculous bonuses for AI to try to help their derpness, to use the technical term, and the lack of being able to have the AI really think and in turn act like human. And I think they were focusing so much on the act like human and not so much thinking like the human. And that's where not only you get the randomness, and it's often not randomness that, holy crap, look at the ridiculous advantage they have, that they really hurt themselves when they just act human and they don't think like human, and then that hurts the single-player experience. And let's be honest, as we've said before on the show, when it comes to Civ, most people are going to experience most of their games in single player. And if the single player experience isn't fun, they're not likely going to then turn around and say, gee, that was fun. Let's try multiplayer now.
Yeah. That's the big question, too. How do you make it so much like a human? And that is tough. I think there's multiple ways you can do that. You could probably just make it all random, like we said, or you can make thousands of different paths that a civilization can take reacting to your actions in the game to the point to where it can't be predictable.
Yeah. You'd almost have to make the choice of those paths difficult to discern, or which paths are taken also difficult to discern or impossible to discern, to make it truly not something that you could just game if there's known paths.
and you want it to be like, oh my gosh, the AI took that action. Why didn't I anticipate that? Or why didn't I do that myself? As opposed to, why did you just help me?
Blah.
Not that I necessarily object, but if a goal of a 4X game like Civ is the replayability, after a while, for the most part, so I'm going to raffle stomp again today, am I? Sometimes we're in the mood for that. You've had a really bad day. You want like a low-level challenge, right? But if you're like, okay, I need something to engage me, to wake me up, to keep me going, click, I win.
Yeah.
All the asynchronous, one-way diplomacy actions in Civ 5, that was just bad. Where the AI can tell you, don't spread your religion to my cities, and you can't tell them the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he wasn't around for that part, but there was a lot of that. Actually, there's a ton of that in vanilla Civ 5. Yeah, if you want interactive AI leaders, allow you to do the same actions that they can do. And, more importantly, make those decisions count.
I would like to add those options need to be viable, because otherwise it's ridiculous. For example, you can demand attack in Civ 4, but unless it's one of the very early game, least expensive ones possible, you're never, ever, ever going to get it. Like, you'll never just say, hey, I could really use liberalism right now, or, you should give me nationalism or I'll kill you. The AI will never cave into that, but it will ask that of you, and you will take a major hit for not giving it to them.
Yeah. Or there's other issues like, oh, I'm bullying your friendly city-state. What are you going to do about it? Doesn't matter what you say.
Yeah.
The AI doesn't take any option that you choose into consideration. It's too late. There's no diplomacy interaction in that. It's like, here's two options. Both of them mean derp.
Why even include that in the game then? Yeah, that is frustrating.
Yeah. Though I do take objection to his going down to the basic relation metric where you're just trying to adjust numbers. That, to me, is a huge step backwards in diplomacy for games.
It depends how it's handled.
No, it doesn't even matter how it's handled. It's just a step backwards. That's old school style of doing it, where you just push up numbers, and pushing the numbers great, except that the AI isn't doing anything. I mean, I do like where he's talking about, you come to till his aid in war or give him food when his people are starving, you're going to get major points. Cool. That's interactive. You're doing something to help them rather than just here's a bunch of cash, blah, blah, blah. That's good design. But, going, oh, well, you're at plus this and I have to get you to plus something else to make you want to be nice to me, and I can get there by doing X, Y, and Z to get you plus, plus, plus. You're removing the disbelief factor. So removing disbelief is always part of good games. So you're not interacting with an AI per se or some other, agent out there. You're interacting with a couple numbers that you're just punching a couple numbers. And then at that point, all the design work on the individual AIs to flesh them out and to make them feel like they're something other than just a number gets undercut in a major way.
See, here's where I disagree with you on that, though, because no matter what you're looking at, every single AI in every 4X game ever, they are numbers. You can't escape that. No matter how you look at it, all these leaders are always going to be numbers in any 4X game. So disbelief or not, whatever, but those numbers are hidden one way or another. So really what differentiates leaders then is how they act. And if you have a model where they'll always like you at plus 10, but they're drastically different to get to plus 10, or what they're willing to do in terms of other aspects of their behavior is different, you can still have that hard cutoff line and have very, very different acting leaders. So for some people, it might be slightly less immersive to know, oh, if I got him the plus 5, he'll help me. But ultimately, that's happening anyway. And it's really hard for me or a lot of other people who are very veteran of the game to think of these AIs as anything other than numbers. They are numbers. The whole game is numbers.
Yeah. Well, yes, it is ultimately, but the point is to get them going a little further away from just, okay, here's a number that you need to push.
Yeah, I think Magin's trying to get away from this. So what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, that too.
Well, okay, but really, all that matters in terms of this diplomacy stuff is how it influences your game decisions and the AIs.
His point on, the fact that it didn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason or whatever, he really is taking a shot at is the AI there to attempt to win, or is the AI there just to be there and modify your game experience at the time? And that's something I can disagree with him on, especially at this stage of 4X reality style games or historical or whatever, the AI should attempt to win. Otherwise, then there's no real challenge.
Yeah.
But basically saying that having an AI attempt to win is a bad plan. And in certain games and certain styles of games, then yes, it actually might be better to just have them there to adjust your gameplay, not actually have something to compete with you. For his current game that he's doing, which is basically just a scenario, it's not really a full-on game. He's very specifically handling one event in history.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, in the context of Civ, it's like a scenario.
Yeah. So basically, the way he's going with it might be the better choice, because there's only so much for the barbarian migration that you can do. You can't really have Attila turn around and found like the massive empire, and the Romans have to deal with him. Everything is already laid out for what he's trying to build.
I think, too, that the whole AI needs to be fun and not to be competitive is a cop-out. In a well-designed game, if a game is designed sufficiently well, the AI trying to win should not be something that's such a deflating experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, most people say that if the AI tried to win, it would break immersion, but that's because the game itself, the design of the game itself is limited to the extent that if you're playing to win, you're abusing mechanics. Well, why are the mechanics like that then?
Yeah, it can be both. It can be both fun and competitive.
Absolutely, but your design has to be really tight then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Depending on your game, proper 4X game where anything can happen and there's multiple styles of how to win, then you should be able to have the AIs attempt to win in those styles. Things like colonization or like this in particular game that he's trying to build, or anything that's basically set type map and there's only one real way out of it, or there can be slightly modified ways out of it, but basically you have to get to a certain point. Then trying to win might not be the best plan, but they should be trying to do something that's part of the replayability factor, being able to beat the game, and that includes other agents trying to win.
John also says, just on the AI in general, that the AI in the base version of Civ 5 was not as strong as it could be, shall we say. Oh, John. He says that Civ 5's AI was a beautiful mesh of interwoven systems. Unfortunately, my enjoyment of building caused me to fall in love with the design rather than its actual impact. I was very proud of my code, but it really wasn't very good.
Oh, John.
That's amazing.
Well, see, the one thing, and I have to take full exception to everything he says here, because, well, one, I actually do know how to design AI, or computational intelligence, not this gameplay AI that gaming industry uses. He's not an AI programmer. He attempted to make something a little bigger, and I've seen the code, so I can see the architecture of how he tried to do it. It wasn't really a good direction that he tried, but he did try something closer to what it should have been. And the problem is, yeah, he doesn't have the history of knowing how to build these things. And therefore, he didn't really know what he was doing, but he did try something, and his knee-jerk reaction, just like pretty much everybody in the gaming industry, is when you try something bigger and it doesn't work because you don't really know what you're doing, go way backwards. And that's exactly what he's suggesting here, is to basically cut it down to something so simple. When you as a developer know exactly what an AI player is doing and why, it becomes much easier to recognize bad behavior and fix it. Except the problem is you now made it a deterministic system, and it's no longer going to have emergent properties, which is important.
To be fair, though, you did just point out that he's building a scenario, and
yeah,
a lot of the factions in this scenario are going to be pretty darn deterministic if they're to be plausible.
But that's fine for his game, but he's talking in general, and especially for Civ 5.
Yeah. Well, as a lay person who doesn't have a lot of programming experience past some C+ classes 10 years ago, it's hard for me to look at this and equate it to actual in-game mechanics in Civ 5 to say, oh, okay, John's right, or okay, you are. It's hard for me to grasp exactly what mechanics he's talking about cutting out here as part of making a more streamlined AI.
Well, let's see if I can say it more specifically, or in at least generalish terms. Think about the AI in Civ 5 as if you were only in your head and you had no access to your hands or your sight or, any environmental interaction. That's how he designed the AI. It kind of ignores what's going on except for minor big changes, and it just kind of decides to do its thing. That's not a great way to do it because obviously when you put humans involved in the game, humans do stuff, AIs do stuff. You should have some change based on what those interactions are. The way he built it, he made some, nice big massive systems. So diplomacy happens, the tech tree side happens. But as you can see in the game, especially the tech tree, that's the most obvious one. All AIs have their paths through the tech tree. There are weights that they put onto the different trees and different, there's long lists of different things that trigger based on different stuff, but it's all just still random number generation. There's no push directly towards something. Like if I declare war on an AI and I have a slightly better tech edge, so say I have trebuchets versus their catapults and they have just pikes or whatever, they don't adjust their strategy to defend against that. They just keep going in their tech tree path. And you can see that there's a number of AIs that will always go up to gunpowder and chemistry. Other AIs will always go to banking. Other AIs will always go to education, etc., all the way through the game. All the AIs will go to atomic theory long before they get to artillery. That is the AI not handling the reality of the game. And there are easy ways to do that. While he does say it's like, if you want a strong AI, there are times when you need to force it to behave in a very specific manner. There are ways to deal with that. Generally, one of the simplest ways is partial order planning. So instead of planning like, I need to go this way, well, you cut that into chunks and you give them each of those chunks one at a time. And then if you need to make a change, you switch out the different chunks based on what's going on. The mess that got written for Civ 5 is probably bigger than what would be needed to handle it.
Under resources, John says, of course, one of the big changes was the shift from resources being, Boolean to quantified. Still feel that making them quantified was a solid design decision, but for a variety of reasons, the execution wasn't everything I wanted to be. That players ended up with easy access to a bit of every resource, and there was almost no reason to trade. In Civ 5, there was almost no demand since you could be virtually self-sufficient. And I'm thinking, okay, so quote-unquote there. But then when he says the difference between having some swordsmen isn't really a big deal compared with the possibility of not having any swordsmen. If I were able to go back and change the design, I probably would have resources show up in more limited quantities and make the units and buildings they unlock much more unique and powerful. I'm thinking, okay, first off, you say probably would. So, okay. But then this part about make the units and buildings they unlock much more unique and powerful. But the thing is, if every civilization is following the same technology tree, short of, unique buildings, for example, and unique units, what is it that's unique about the buildings and the units then? Like, what is it that would then be different?
It's something like, for the unique building, like, you need aluminum to get a hydrodam. A hydrodam gives you all that production on the river. Plus, you have to actually be on the river. If there was limited amounts of aluminum in the game, then your choice of putting that hydrodam there versus putting it somewhere else or building a unit that requires aluminum becomes a little bit more powerful of a choice. I actually do somewhat agree with him on the resource question. You can get too many of a resource type. So swordsmen, 6 swordsmen will do you very well for quite some time. And you can get that out of just like one spot if you happen to get a 6 iron tile.
Yeah.
And where he's talking about is that there should be, at least on the military side, where he's going is that if you're going to build an army, there's a lot of generic non-resource requiring units, and there's a couple, if you're, able to max out at like 2 or 3 swordsmen in an army, but most of the rest is spearmen and then your bows. That's a very different game than building 5 swordsmen and taking somebody out.
Okay, and then along those lines, it would also get to, when we're talking about, well, the game is progressing, so what do I really need, horses or iron for anymore? Look at all these excess resources. Hey, AI, do you want them? What would you give me for this?
Nothing.
Yeah, gift them to me. That would be awesome, because it's like, what's the point in still having these anymore?
Yeah, well, that's a different issue. Specific era transitions, the AI stopped caring about certain resources entirely, even if they still have units that require those resources, and it's the only unit they can build in that unit line. they just instantly stop caring about them. And that can hurt the AI far worse than anything else. It's like, we're in the Renaissance on an islands map, but you happen to hit industrial and no longer care about iron, but the only boat you can build to deal with me is a frigate, and that requires iron, but you don't care about iron anymore. So thanks for all the frigates. And I win. That is minor in the resource factor, because that can be easily changed and adjusted. But yeah, limiting the amounts. And it is true that, the non-strategic resources like wheat and stuff like that isn't as valuable as it may have been in Civ 4, where you could trade them, at least.
Nowhere near as valuable.
And they had other benefits for like the health system and stuff like that.
Yes, he touches upon that as well.
Yeah. But really what he's talking about, at least for the first bit of this, is the question of the two models. There's the PopCap style where, you find two and you can build two things. And then there is the stockpile model where basically you get access to a source and it gives you a certain amount per turn, and over a number of turns you build up an amount and then you can spend X to get some sort of thing. And even if you lose that source, you still have your thing that you built because you already spent it.
Economics was dealt with on two fronts, which was the introduction of global happiness and the removal of the research, commerce, and culture sliders. He says that the intention with the global happiness was to make it possible for smaller empires to compete with the larger ones, but he says the second X in 4X stands for expansion, for crying out loud. I lost sight of this as I pursued other objectives because the problem was that happiness strongly encouraged you to stay small, and the penalties for not obliging with this demand were quite harsh.
I don't know about the whole staying small. Because when you provide a lot of repeatable global happiness, because you got to keep in mind, he's talking Civ 5 vanilla, not Gods and Kings. There was no real strongly encouraged to stay small, because there was a very limited amount of local happiness.
Yeah, infinite city sprawl through puppets, anyone?
Well, you could go infinite city sprawl, but you couldn't go infinite pop tall. There was just no way. So I think he's a little off on that particular respect, but it did change things, obviously, with the way happiness and the penalties actually are quite harsh, except that they're not scaled. Going to -1 removes 99% of your food. Derp.
Yep.
And then going from -9 to -10 removes, a mass chunk of your production.
Mm-hmm.
And gives you a unit penalty. And then going a 1 point change from -19 to -20 gives you rebels and all sorts of other issues, blah, blah, blah. So yes, they were quite harsh if you hit those levels, but it was not scaled. There was no benefits to being super happy. Actually, all the benefits were just to stay at 0 or 1, unless you really wanted a lot of golden ages.
Oh yeah, and then Vanilla was on, hey, let's focus on specialists. Golden Age. Golden Age. Golden Age. Oh, is my happiness only at 0 or 1? Oh, that doesn't matter. Let's have some more specialists. And then removing the research and commerce culture sliders also came with positives and negatives. I'm thinking, well, duh. But he elaborates, I always found fiddling with sliders in strategy games to be boring, busy work, and in that sense, I don't miss them. But the sliders also had a hidden value that I didn't realize until later. They gave players the ability to shift directions at any time, and he's even stronger in his view on that when he compares social policies, which Civ 5 introduced for the Civ series, as compared to civics that we saw in Civilization 4, which I thought was an even more extreme knee-jerk reaction than almost anything else that he had to say here.
You can make direction changes without the sliders. You just have to have the mechanics in place to deal with it.
Yeah.
Civ 4 sliders, you didn't need the sliders, but you could still massively change directions just by changing all your civics. Even Civ 4 had double the amount of being able to change directions in a big way. And I never really believed that not funding research turned into being able to fund some culture.
Although it was necessary for the culture victories of Civ 4.
Yeah, well,
it's not necessarily a good design decision, and I would agree because I hate culture victories in both games. But
yeah,
you need a slider for it.
For policies, oh John,
oh John,
I don't rage a lot, because I'm Canadian. Stereotype what? He says, I like both the policy system featured in Civ 5 and the civics system from Civ 4, which are simply two different takes on the same concept, the ability to shape the character, in air quotes, of your empire. Okay, yeah, fine. With policies, I wanted you to feel like you were slowly accumulating this identity over time. By contrast, civics allows you to completely reforge your empire on a dime. Both systems have their strengths and weaknesses, but I now find the design of civics more appealing because of that capacity to make sudden and dramatic shifts. Okay, that's because, to me, the design decisions you made in part with regards to policies where, for example, would you like to adopt this social policy? Okay, well, no, it's in conflict with the other one, right? So therefore, everything you put into that other one, zip, gone. That's not a problem with the policy. That was a problem with the design of your implementation of the policy. That's like saying, guess what? Gloves? Yeah, they can be used to keep your hands warm, but they can also be used to commit crimes. Okay, so therefore, you know what? I prefer not to use gloves.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it's also the difference between civics and policies, is that policies are permanent when you choose them. You spent, X quantity of culture to get this policy. Even if you take a conflicting tree and therefore, wipe out all your previous choices, you've still spent it on that one thing. And that one thing is it. And you can't get that back. There is no going back. There is no changing your empire because something happened. Or at least with civics, you can change on the dime and you're not spending stuff on it.
Other than anarchy.
Yeah, other than anarchy, but who really cared about that?
It's significant.
Brief, depending on who you picked anyways. But anyway, civics let you completely reforge your empire on a dime, but there's no history. And that's what he's trying to get into. Policies let you keep the history of your empire over time, because even if you do retool significantly your empire, because something major happened, you still have that historical background for some of it. And that's where policies had the strengths, but policies can't let you retool. All it can do is let you continue adding. You can change, but you're basically giving up a ton for that change. And that's part of the policy side that doesn't really work too well when it comes to being able to adjust to change. But whereas the civics, basically, it didn't matter, if 100 years ago you were like the biggest punk on the planet, you could all automatically go, look, hi, I'm a pious, peace-loving person now. And everybody would be like, oh, you're a pious, peace-loving person now.
Well, like everyone else didn't care.
Yeah, no one cares. So
no one really cared about civics unless you were running the same civic as them, and it was their favorite civic.
Yeah.
And a lot of AIs would happily switch out of their quote-unquote favorite civic for the more advanced ones anyway. So you never really got late-game relations based on civics unless the AI happened to like a late-game civic. Civics were really just strictly, okay, what is it providing to your empire? Its influence on diplomacy was minimal unless you're farming for a UN or AP cheese win.
Yeah.
Finally, in John's article on revisiting the design of Civilization 5, combat, by far the most significant change I made with Civ 5, was the way in which wars were fought. So, of course, one of the biggest challenges on Earth by going to, one unit per tile as opposed to stacks was writing a competent combat AI. Oh, isn't this interesting how all of these systems are all woven together? Programming an AI which can effectively maneuver dozens of units around it is extremely tactically confined spaces is incredibly difficult. Guess what, John? It can also be incredibly difficult for humans too, but yeah, compounded for the poor AI. The congestion caused also impacted other parts of the game. Every unit needed its own tile, and that meant the map filled up pretty quickly. To address this, I slowed the rate of production, which in turn led to more waiting around for buckets to fill up. Yeah, so...
But every game has that. Like, there's not a single game out there that says, hey, look, you should have, mass spam of units every turn.
That's true, but I think his point is that, and I think he mentions it in the article, that there should have been like 4 times as many hexes or something.
Yeah, in here, actually, he talks about the map should be bigger.
And that I agree with, because cluttering just isn't fun. You have to then swap units all over the place, and they're just everywhere.
Well, okay, Civ 5, there's no necessity to have so many units that you're crammed in to an area. In general, you can do more with less because of the promotion pass.
Yeah.
But... yeah, I mean, there's a
balance. The AI takes, though.
Yeah, obviously. Do more with less, so I can do more with more?
It does less with more.
Yeah.
But man, does that make it a little bit more tedious than it has to be.
But that comes back to AI design.
Well, it comes back to practical design, too, though, because you really, like, when you have that much cluttering, your total possibilities of tactical choice just plummets. You just have a line of death that you create.
Yeah. I seem to remember World War I being a line of death where no one really moved.
You know what, though? I bet you World War I wasn't very fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Which one was?
And we're trying to make a game that's fun.
Yeah, well, these things happen, especially if you're trying to do a historical-esque.
World War I was
building.
rather exceptional, though, in terms of that.
Yeah.
There were other wars that were similar, but I don't think any was quite that extreme.
Well, no. I think that was probably the most extreme effect of it. But most wars up to that point were like, here's a huge line of people and a huge line of people. See if we can push through each other.
Yes, but they were not huge trenches of people just sitting there just shelling each other for years.
Yeah, but the 1 unit per tile is definitely the better system. Adjusting mechanics to deal with, okay, so you have to make units take longer to build. Okay, so what? But then, of course, they put gold buying of units in, so that kind of shortchanged that system. A competent tactical AI? Yeah, it's plausible. It is plausible to make one. Did they? No, but that's a different story. And that reps back up to the AI conversation. And obviously it has been massaged and done better for Gods and Kings, so there was room for improvement.
Speaking of which, John acknowledges that in his onward and the conclusion to this.
Yeah.
That he said, Frax has done an excellent job improving the gameplay following my departure, and I can't wait to see what they do next. This prefaces that a little bit by saying that the gameplay here had several rough edges at release, but those were all due to decisions I made with the design. Well, you don't need to completely fall on your sword there, John.
Haha.
It wasn't just you.
It takes more than one person to make a game. And that even makes it worse that he's titling the game after himself. I do like a good retrospective. It's actually very important. And I do like the fact that he stopped and thought about stuff. That is good.
And sharing this publicly.
And sharing it publicly, that's fine. Disagree with a lot of his conclusions, but at least he tried. But yeah, I mean, the whole fall on your own sword thing. He's going for a, look at me, I made some failings, but I'm going to make up for it, blah, 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 but it was all on me. I mean, that's all BS. A lot of the bugs people complained about in the game was just standard programming. It probably was stuff that John didn't even write himself.
Call in today. In North America, the number is 301-637-7659.
That's 301-637-POLY.
In Europe, 44121-288-7659. That's 44121-288-POLY.
The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
For more information on PolyCast,
Our sibling shows Modcast, Revcast, and Turncast,
Or about PolyCast in general,
Log on to the series' official website at
Polycast.net.
thepolycast.net.
Now, this is something that none of my fellow panelists have heard. There was an email that we received.
yeah, he's going to have to read it to us, and then we're really like, huh?
He says, "Hello, my name is JM, and I send this inquiry to your company in regards to order some leader heads."
Is this going to be another one of those, why aren't the leader heads naked?
why aren't the leader heads naked?
I want you to email me with the sizes and prices of the leader heads you have in stock. Immediate response is require and advise on payment method. With kind regards. I know that this is a bot, but it's pretty funny.
It's awesome. Please send 1 million internet cookies to the
We might
polycast.net.
deliver you Montezuma's head.
I want 30 Monties.
Phil, as long as it's not the full Monties, we might be able to accommodate
No,
you.
my strategy is the full Monty. That's something different from buying 30 Monty leader heads.
I don't know about that.
Well, you might need to employ one to do the other, but still.
You're employing your full Monty to get a Monty leader head?
I think it's the other way around.
I'm not sure at this point.
Someone has to bring this show to an end.
Me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. This was PolyCast episode number 167. I'm the Observer, and we also had the Me in Team,
Toodles.
and Majin,
Attritioning your troll face.
Dan Q,
I am greater than the sum of my part.
and Mackie. Record date February 23rd, 2013.
Civilization 4 and 5 sound clips. Copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright Civilized Communication at civcom.net.